The air in the Senate Budget Committee hearing room was thick with the stale scent of old paper and ambition. A quiet Tuesday morning dedicated to the unglamorous work of highway funding. Then she arrived. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a surprise witness, moved through the space not like a guest, but like a conquering hero, her presence a jolt of pure electricity in a room accustomed to the low hum of bureaucratic procedure. She was the revolution in a designer suit, the embodiment of a new, impatient America, and she had chosen her target. At the dais, Senator John Kennedy, a man who looked more like a small-town history teacher than a political heavyweight, watched her approach. His hands, weathered by time and Louisiana's sun, were folded calmly on the polished wood. He had seen her type before, the ones who mistook a southern drawl for a slow mind, who saw gray hair and saw a relic ready to be toppled. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, the pale blue eyes behind them missing nothing. He knew the performance was about to begin. He also knew it would not end the way she planned. She began her testimony not with policy, but with poison. Her voice, a finely tuned instrument of righteous fury. "Senator Kennedy," she declared, her words sharp and precise, each one a polished stone aimed directly at him. "You sit there in your $3,000 suit, a monument to the very establishment that is crushing the families I represent, and you dare to lecture us on the needs of the working class." The room, once sleepy, was now a theater. Cameras that had been idle swiveled to capture the unfolding drama. In the gallery, a sea of young faces, her acolytes, leaned forward, their phones held high to broadcast the impending slaughter. They had come for blood, and their champion was ready to provide it. "Your entire career," she continued, her voice rising, a crescendo of indignation, "is a testament to privilege. You moved through the hallowed halls of Oxford and Vanderbilt while the people in your own state were drowning, unable to afford the insulin you vote against, crushed by the student debt you refuse to alleviate. You speak of hard work, but you have never known a day of it. You are a caricature, a living, breathing symbol of the rot at the heart of this institution." Kennedy remained motionless, his expression unreadable. He let her words wash over him, a torrent of accusations he had anticipated for months. He had studied her speeches, her tweets, her every public pronouncement. He understood the strategy: to personalize, to demonize, to transform a policy debate into a moral crusade with him as the villain. It was a powerful tactic, and against a lesser opponent, it would have been devastating. But Kennedy was not a lesser opponent. He was a crocodile, ancient and patient, perfectly content to let his prey exhaust itself before the final inescapable snap of his jaws. He slowly reached for the microphone, a simple gesture that somehow commanded more attention than all her shouting. The room fell silent. When he spoke, his voice was not defensive or angry. It was a slow, gentle Louisiana drawl, as soft and heavy as the humid air before a storm. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez," he began, the sound wrapping around her name with an almost paternal warmth, "I want to thank you for being here. Your passion is a remarkable thing to witness. It is a great service to this country when our young people care so deeply." The compliment was a masterful piece of misdirection. It caught her off guard, a gentle parry to her ferocious thrust. She had come prepared for a fight, not for a disarming smile and a kind word. She blinked, her momentum momentarily broken. "You've made some powerful points about my life," Kennedy continued, his tone still conversational, as if they were discussing the weather over sweet tea. "And you are correct. I have been blessed with a fine education. But since you've brought up my background, I wonder if you'd be interested in the parts that don't appear on my Wikipedia page." He didn't wait for her to answer. "My father, you see, he didn't run a corporation. He sold burial insurance in the small towns of Louisiana, collecting premiums a quarter at a time from folks who just wanted to make sure they wouldn't be a burden when they passed. My mother taught 8th grade science in a public school that the state had all but forgotten, wrestling with kids that the system had already labeled as lost causes. We lived in a small house with swamp coolers that barely worked against the Louisiana heat, and the one bathroom we all shared had a permanent line outside it every morning. He paused, letting the image settle in the minds of the audience. The narrative was shifting. This wasn't the story of a pampered aristocrat. This was something else entirely. I started working when I was 13, delivering newspapers on a rusty bicycle before the sun came up, saving every dime for a college my parents could never afford. At Vanderbilt, I wasn't in a fraternity. I was in the cafeteria, wearing a hairnet, and serving lunch to classmates whose fathers owned the companies I'd one day regulate. My time at Oxford wasn't a gift from a wealthy benefactor. It was a Rhodes Scholarship, an honor awarded for academic merit, not the size of one's bank account. The gallery was quiet now. The smug satisfaction on the faces of her supporters had been replaced by a flicker of confusion. This wasn't the easy takedown they had been promised. But, Congresswoman, Kennedy said, his voice acquiring a new edge, as sharp and clean as a surgeon's scalpel. Since we are on the topic of authenticity, of what it means to truly understand the struggles of working people, I thought it was only fair to look into your background as well. A ripple of anticipation went through the room. The hunter was turning to face the huntress. You speak of your roots in the Bronx, and that is part of your story. But you grew up in a lovely home in Yorktown Heights, a comfortable suburb where the median income is nearly $100,000 a year. You attended Boston University, a fine private school with a tuition that now approaches $80,000 annually. Your struggles, while I am sure they were real to you, were not the struggles of the people you claim as your own. Her face, which had been a mask of righteous confidence, now showed the first crack. A flush of red crept up her neck. My family faced hardship, she stammered, the words suddenly lacking their earlier conviction. Oh, I have no doubt, Kennedy interrupted, his voice still gentle, yet utterly relentless. Life is full of hardship for everyone. But hardship is a relative thing, isn't it? You see, I've done my homework, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. I have read your financial disclosures, every single one. And I have some questions. Questions about what they tell us about what it means to be an authentic voice for the working poor. The atmosphere in the room had changed completely. The air crackled with a new kind of tension. This was no longer a lecture. It was an interrogation. Kennedy reached under his desk and, with a theatrical slowness, produced a thick manila folder. He placed it before him. Then another, and another. He arranged the 3 folders in a neat line, a silent testament to the depth of his preparation. You accused me of theater, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that forced everyone to lean in. But all theater needs an audience. And I believe your audience is about to discover who the real performer is. AOC's posture, once so aggressively confident, now coiled into a defensive crouch. Her hands, which had gestured with such sweeping authority, now gripped the edges of the witness table as if to steady herself against a sudden tremor. The hunter's instinct, ancient and primal, flickered in her eyes. The instinct that tells you when the landscape has shifted, when the rustle in the grass is no longer prey, but predator. I am here, she began, her voice tight with a new, unfamiliar strain, to discuss the nation's infrastructure. Kennedy's smile was thin and sharp. As was I, he replied, his tone deceptively mild. But you, Congresswoman, chose a different path. You chose to make this a referendum on character, on authenticity, on who has the moral authority to speak for the forgotten men and women of this country. It is a worthy topic. So let us have that conversation. But let us have it with the facts, shall we? With the deliberate care of a watchmaker assembling a complex timepiece, he opened the first folder. The rustle of the paper seemed to echo in the profound silence of the room. "You have built a powerful brand on your crusade against the excesses of the wealthy and the corrupt," he began, his eyes fixed on her. "So I think it is only appropriate that we begin with your appearance at the 2021 Met Gala." The name of the event hung in the air. A glittering, decadent jewel suddenly dropped into the drab proceedings. The blood visibly drained from her face, leaving behind a pale, waxy sheen. She had walked into an ambush, and the jaws of the trap were now closing with an audible click that only she could hear. "Senator," she protested, her voice weak, "I fail to see the relevance of a cultural event to a discussion about highway funding." "Oh, but it is the most relevant thing in the world," Kennedy countered, his smile never faltering. "Because infrastructure, true infrastructure, is not just about concrete and steel. It is built on a foundation of trust. It is built on the credibility of public servants. And I am afraid, Congresswoman, that your foundation is riddled with cracks." He lifted a large, glossy photograph from the folder. The image was instantly recognizable, a masterpiece of political branding that had set the internet ablaze. There she was, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, bathed in the flashbulbs of 100 cameras, resplendent in a pristine white gown. And scrawled across her back in blood-red letters were the words that had defined her political identity: "Tax the rich." "September 13th, 2021, Kennedy narrated, his voice a low, steady drumbeat of facts. "A Monday evening. While the vast majority of your constituents in the Bronx and Queens were finishing their shifts, making dinner for their children, or worrying about how to pay the rent, you were here. The ticket for this event, as you know, costs a minimum of $35,000. That is more than the annual income of a significant portion of the families you claim to represent." He let the number hang in the air, a stark and brutal contrast. "The gown you wore, a piece of performance art you said, was valued at over $15,000. The custom shoes, the borrowed jewelry, the handbag, another $12,000. You stood there, a living billboard against wealth, while draped in $62,000 of luxury goods, sipping champagne with the very billionaires you condemn." "The dress was borrowed," she shot back, a flicker of her old fire returning. "It was a political statement to—" "Ah, yes, borrowing," Kennedy interrupted, his voice as smooth as silk. He slid another document from the folder. "Let us talk about borrowing. This is the final report from the House Ethics Committee's investigation into this very evening. An investigation, I might add, that concluded you received impermissible gifts. Would you care to explain their findings to the committee, or shall I?" Her silence was a confession. Kennedy adjusted his glasses and began to read, his voice devoid of emotion, letting the words of the report deliver the blow. "The committee finds that while the representative has stated that the items were borrowed, she did not, in fact, pay for the extensive services associated with her attendance in a timely manner. Payments to vendors for services including, but not limited to, hairstyling, makeup artistry, and transportation were not rendered until after the Office of Congressional Ethics had already begun its official inquiry." He looked up from the paper, his gaze pinning her to her seat. "In fact, Congresswoman, this report details that you and your team left a trail of unpaid bills totaling $123,458. You attended a party for the 1% and left the working people who primped and prepared you holding the bag." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The quiet hum of reporters typing on their laptops grew into a frantic clatter. The narrative had not just been reversed. It had been turned inside out. "But what I find most illuminating," Kennedy continued, his voice softening, drawing the room in closer, "is this." He produced a simple, handwritten letter on cheap, lined notebook paper. It looked profoundly out of place amidst the official documents. "This is from a woman named Maria Santos, She is a seamstress. She lives in your district. She does the exact same kind of skilled labor that went into creating the dress you wore. She wrote to me because, she says, her own representative would not listen. AOC flinched, as if struck. Would you like me to read her letter? Kennedy asked, the question both a courtesy and a threat. Again, silence was his answer. He began to read, his voice now imbued with a genuine, unfeigned empathy. Dear Senator Kennedy, I am writing to you as a last resort. I work 60, sometimes 70 hours a week doing alterations. My son has a severe medical condition, and the insurance doesn't cover everything. The bills are burying my family. I wrote to Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's office 3 times. I called twice. I never received a response. Not once. Then I saw her on television at that fancy party, wearing that dress. She says she is our fighter, but she is living their life, not ours. Please, someone has to know. He carefully folded the letter and placed it on top of the glossy photograph of the gala. The contrast was devastating. The desperate plea of a working woman lying atop the image of performative rebellion. Maria Santos earns $32,000 a year, Kennedy said quietly, and she pays her bills. On time. This is a smear, AOC whispered, her voice cracking. A coordinated right-wing attack. Is the bipartisan House Ethics Committee a right-wing conspiracy? Kennedy asked, his voice gentle but insistent. Are the small business owners you failed to pay part of this conspiracy? I have their invoices right here. He lifted another paper. The makeup artist who made you look ready for your revolutionary moment? You paid her $2,500 invoice 478 days late. The hairstylist? 436 days. The drivers, working-class men and women from your own city, waited nearly 2 months to be paid for the car service you used. In my home state, we have a simple term for taking services and not paying for them. We call it theft. In Washington, D.C., and apparently, it's called making a political statement. He leaned back, allowing the weight of the evidence to settle. The room was a tomb. The young activists who had come to cheer on their hero now stared at her, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. But the most perfect, the most poetic detail of this entire affair, Kennedy said, pulling one last item from the folder, a screenshot of a tweet she had posted that night, is what you yourself wrote. The medium is the message. You were absolutely right, Congresswoman. The message you sent was crystal clear. Rules for thee, but not for me. He closed the first folder with a soft, final thud. The sound was like a gavel coming down, the end of the first act of her public trial. But do not worry, he said, his eyes already moving to the second, even thicker folder. We are just getting started. You wanted to talk about fighting corruption, so let's talk about your campaign finances. I think your donors will be very interested to learn where their $5 and $10 contributions actually went. The brief recess the chairman had called felt less like a pause and more like the moment between a lightning strike and the inevitable deafening roar of thunder. When the hearing reconvened, the atmosphere in the room had been irrevocably altered. The sense of partisan sport was gone, replaced by the grim, voyeuristic tension of a public dissection. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez returned to the witness table, but she was a different woman. The firebrand had been extinguished, leaving behind a pale, unnerved figure who moved with the brittle caution of someone walking on shattered glass. Her eyes, which had once burned with conviction, now darted around the room, searching for an escape that did not exist. Senator Kennedy, by contrast, seemed to have drawn strength from the recess. He sat with the placid stillness of a seasoned fisherman who knows the fish is already on the line. All that remains is the slow, steady work of reeling it in. He opened the second folder, its contents meticulously organized with colored tabs, a library of her own political dealings. Congresswoman, he began, his voice maintaining its unhurried, almost scholarly tone, "you have made your opposition to corporate PACU money and the corrupting influence of dark money a cornerstone of your political identity. It is a noble stance. So let us examine how closely your own practices align with those principles." He produced a thick sheaf of documents, the logo of the Federal Election Commission visible on the top page. "These are the FEC filings for your campaign and for two political action committees you were closely affiliated with, Brand New Congress PAC and Justice Democrats PAC. They tell a fascinating story of innovation, a story of strategic consulting." The phrase, delivered in his gentle drawl, dripped with irony. AOC shifted in her seat, the fabric of her blazer rustling in the quiet room. "My campaign has been lauded for its transparency and grassroots funding," she stated, the words sounding like a memorized line, hollow and unconvincing. "Has it?" Kennedy's eyebrows arched above his glasses. "Let's explore that. These two PACs, which you credit with helping launch your career, were founded and controlled by a Mr. Saikat Chakrabarti, a brilliant strategist by all accounts. He was also, simultaneously, your campaign manager, and later your chief of staff. Is that correct?" Her hesitation was almost imperceptible, but in the supercharged silence, it was a thunderclap. "Saikat was a visionary leader in the progressive movement," she said, her answer a careful evasion. "Indeed," Kennedy agreed, his voice smooth as honey. "So visionary, in fact, that he devised a system to move money in ways that are opaque. According to these FEC reports, these PACs, which were funded by idealistic donors from across the country, transferred over $885,000 to two private limited liability companies. These LLCs were also controlled by Mr. Chakrabarti. Their names? Brand New Congress LLC and Brand New Campaign LLC. He paused, letting the names sink in. "Do you know what these companies did with that nearly $1 million, Congresswoman?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. "Neither does the FEC," Kennedy continued, answering for her. "Neither do the donors. Because, you see, that is the magic of an LLC. Unlike a political campaign or a PAC, a private LLC is a black box. It has no legal obligation to disclose where its money goes or what it spends it on. Mr. Chakrabarti created the perfect laundering mechanism. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations went in, labeled as strategic consulting, and vanished from public view. No accountability, no transparency." He slid a highlighted document across the table. "But here is where you come in. Your own campaign, the one that so proudly refused corporate money, then turned around and paid these very same LLCs for services. So, idealistic grassroots donations flowed from the PACs into the black box of the LLCs and then were paid out to your campaign staff, all under the control of the same individual. In the financial world, we have a name for moving money through a series of entities to obscure its origin and purpose. We call it money laundering. In your world, you call it a revolution. Those are baseless and defamatory allegations," she snapped, a spark of her former self returning. But it was the desperate anger of a cornered animal. "Are they?" Kennedy calmly retrieved another document. "Let's talk about your romantic partner, Mr. Riley Roberts, a talented web developer, I understand. According to these FEC records from Brand New Congress PAC, Mr. Roberts was paid $6,000 in 2017, two payments of $3,000 each, listed as marketing consultant fees." He looked up at her, his gaze patient and piercing. "Could you please inform the committee what specific marketing expertise Mr. Roberts possessed at that time to justify these payments?" Her face, already pale, became ashen. The attack had moved from her political practices to her personal life, a line she herself had crossed at the beginning of the hearing. "Riley, he provided assistance with our digital strategy," she stammered. "I see," Kennedy said, producing a printed page. I took the liberty of reviewing his professional profile on LinkedIn. It lists a bachelor's degree in sociology. His work experience is exclusively in user experience design and web development. There is no mention of marketing, no portfolio of marketing work, no list of marketing clients, except, it seems, for the political operation run by his girlfriend's chief of staff. He leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly. So I ask again, what did he market? And more importantly, did you disclose this financial relationship to the FEC? Because federal law is quite clear about payments to family members and, as the statute delicately puts it, romantic partners. It is a requirement designed to prevent precisely this kind of nepotism and self-dealing. The trap was closing, and every reporter in the room knew they were witnessing the birth of a major scandal. Their fingers flew across their keyboards, filing breaking news alerts that would soon be flashing on phones across the country. But there is more, Kennedy said, his voice relentless. Let's discuss your campaign's own spending. This is a formal complaint filed with the FEC by a nonpartisan watchdog group. It notes that your campaign repeatedly reported tens of thousands of dollars in credit card payments to American Express with no itemization, just a lump sum. No disclosure of what was purchased, from whom, or for what campaign purpose. For a champion of transparency, you seem remarkably fond of secrecy. He pulled out another document. Here is a payment for $3,700 to a Mr. Juan D. Gonzalez for training. What kind of training, Congresswoman? And here, $850 to the Bombazo Dance Company. Was your campaign staff being trained in political salsa? Those were legitimate community outreach events, she protested, but her voice was thin, reedy. I am sure they felt legitimate to you, Kennedy said, his tone dripping with faux sincerity. But the law, the very law you swear to uphold, requires documentation. It requires the kind of transparency you demand from every other political entity in this nation, but which you seem to believe does not apply to you. He picked up one final set of papers, a stack of printed text messages. These messages, obtained by investigators, are between you and Mr. Chakrabarty. In one, he writes, "Don't sweat the FEC stuff. The LLCs will cover it. Remember, if it's technically legal, it's legal." Your response is what I find most telling. He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. You wrote, "As long as we're covered, the revolution can't be stopped by paperwork." The quote landed with the force of a physical blow. The revolution can't be stopped by paperwork. It was the ethos of an ideologue who believed her ends justified any means. It was the sound of hypocrisy made manifest. In the gallery, the few remaining supporters looked utterly betrayed. Their small dollar donations, given in good faith to fuel a movement, had been funneled into a shadowy system of LLCs, used to pay the candidate's boyfriend, and spent on expenses that were hidden from public view. The rules are just paperwork when they apply to you, Kennedy summarized, his voice heavy with disappointment. But they are the sacred texts of democracy when you wield them against your opponents. You have not created a new kind of politics, Congresswoman. You have simply perfected the oldest kind. The kind where the powerful do as they please, and the people who believe in them pay the price. He closed the second folder. The sound echoed the first, another chapter of her political obituary written. "We will take a brief recess," the chairman announced, his voice strained. As she rose on unsteady legs, Kennedy's voice cut through the murmur of the room, quiet but clear. "When we return, Congresswoman, we should discuss Amazon. I think the people of Queens, the people who lost 25,000 jobs, deserve to hear the real story of your victory." When the hearing reconvened, the room had taken on the somber quality of a wake. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a heavy, oppressive atmosphere of grim finality. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez returned to her seat at the witness table, but she seemed diminished, her physical presence smaller. as if the weight of the preceding hours had compressed her very being. The vibrant red of her blazer now seemed garish against the pallor of her skin. She looked not like a warrior, but like a defendant awaiting sentencing. Senator Kennedy, in stark contrast, appeared almost mournful. The thrill of the hunt was gone, and what remained was the sad, methodical business of finishing it. He opened the third folder, this one thicker than the previous two, its contents a dense catalog of economic data and human consequence. "Congresswoman," he began, his voice softer now, tinged with a note of sorrow, "let us turn to what you have described as one of your proudest achievements, the defeat of Amazon's plan to build its second headquarters in your district. You framed it as a heroic victory of the people over corporate greed. I would like to examine the fruits of that victory." He produced a professionally bound report, its cover bearing the seal of the New York State Comptroller's Office. Let us begin with the numbers before we proceed to the people. In November of 2018, Amazon proposed to build a massive campus in Long Island City, Queens. According to this independent analysis by the state of New York, not Amazon's PR, but your own state's budget office, the project was projected to create a minimum of 25,000 direct jobs. He paused, letting the numbers settle. 25,000 jobs with an average salary, not minimum wage, but an average salary of $150,000 per year. The analysis further projected an additional 65,000 indirect and induced jobs: construction workers, restaurant staff, shopkeepers, dry cleaners. A total of 90,000 jobs in and around your district. Is that figure, from your own state's government, inaccurate? "Those were speculative numbers designed to sell a bad deal," she responded, her voice a monotone, reciting a well-worn talking point that now sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Were they?" Kennedy asked mildly. He slid the report forward. The projected economic impact, again, according to the state, was $186 billion over 25 years. The tax revenue for the city and state was projected to be $27.5 billion. He looked up, his gaze steady. "You celebrated when you killed this deal. I have your tweet here." He lifted a printed screenshot. "Anything is possible," you wrote. "Today was the day a group of dedicated, everyday New Yorkers and their neighbors defeated Amazon's corporate greed. You were very proud of that. I was proud to fight against $3 billion in corporate welfare," she countered, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "Let us analyze that welfare," Kennedy said, pulling another document from the folder. The $3 billion in incentives were not a cash handout. They were performance-based tax credits. Amazon would only receive those credits after they had created the jobs and paid the salaries. For their $3 billion investment, the people of New York were projected to receive $27.5 billion in new tax revenue. That is a 9-to-1 return on investment. You did not save your city $3 billion. You cost your city a net $24.5 billion. He let the staggering math hang in the silent room. $24.5 billion that could have funded affordable housing, repaired subways, hired teachers, and expanded health care. You killed the funding for every progressive cause you claimed to champion because you were more interested in a symbolic victory than in pragmatic governance. The community did not want it, she insisted. The community? Kennedy's eyebrows rose. Which part of the community? The activists who share your ideology, or the actual residents who have to live with the consequences? I took the liberty of asking them. He gestured to the large display screens in the hearing room, which flickered to life. The face of a man in his 50s, his skin weathered and his hands calloused, filled the screen. He wore a hard hat and a Union jacket. "My name is Miguel Suarez," the man said, his voice thick with a Queen's accent and quiet anger. "I'm a Local 3 electrician. For us, HQ2 wasn't some abstract debate. It was 1,500 good-paying union jobs. My son, he just finished his apprenticeship. He was going to be on that job site. He was going to have a career, a pension, benefits. Now, he's driving for Uber Eats. You tell me how AOC helped my family. The screen changed. A black woman in her 40s, standing in front of a small, tidy storefront, appeared. Denise Williams. I own a catering business right here in Long Island City. When the Amazon deal was announced, I took out a loan. I hired 2 more people from the neighborhood. I bought a new van. I was ready. Then she drove them away. I had to lay off my new hires. I almost went bankrupt. She was on TV celebrating while I was at my kitchen table trying to figure out how to tell 2 mothers they were out of a job. Another face. An elderly Korean woman, her expression a mixture of sadness and exhaustion. I own a dry cleaning shop. 40 years. I thought, Amazon comes, my business will be worth something. I can finally sell. I can retire. See my grandchildren. Now, the shop is worthless. Who wants to buy a business in a neighborhood that's dying? I am 74 years old. I ask my grandchildren to pray that I die behind the counter so they don't have to pay for a funeral. Kennedy clicked off the display. The raw, unscripted pain of the testimonials silenced the room more effectively than any shouting match could have. These were not statistics. They were lives. They were the human cost of her ideology. I have dozens more of these, he said quietly. Dozens of your constituents who feel betrayed. But let's return to the data. He produced a simple, brutal chart. Since Amazon's withdrawal, commercial real estate vacancies in Long Island City are up 58%. Small business closures are up 32%. Your district's economic heart has been ripped out, and you are still taking a victory lap on its corpse. He produced a formal letter, its letterhead bearing the name of the New York Building and Construction Trades Council. They represent over 100,000 union workers, Kennedy explained. He read from the letter. Representative Ocasio-Cortez's ideological crusade against Amazon directly cost our members an estimated 11,000 family-sustaining construction jobs. She chose headlines over hard hats, and the working families of Queens will be paying the price for decades. They're lying, she whispered, the accusation reflexive and weak. Are they? Kennedy countered, producing another letter. This one is from the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. They were in the process of negotiating a neutrality agreement to organize the Amazon workers. Your victory didn't just kill 25,000 non-union jobs, it killed the opportunity to create 25,000 union jobs. You didn't defeat corporate power, Congresswoman. You protected it from the labor movement you claim to champion. The final video appeared on the screen. A young Latina woman, no older than 30, tears streaming down her face. My name is Carmen Rodriguez, she said, her voice choked with emotion. I have a degree in computer science from a city college. I have 2 kids. I'm a single mom. I work stocking shelves at a grocery store because there are no tech jobs for someone like me in this borough. Amazon was my ticket. It was my chance to use my degree, to give my kids a better life, to get out of my mother's 2-bedroom apartment. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stole my future. She stole my children's future. And she did it for Twitter likes. She doesn't know us. She doesn't care about us. She cares about being famous. Kennedy let the woman's final, devastating accusation hang in the air. He then produced one last item from the folder. It was a photograph from the night the Amazon deal officially died. It showed AOC beaming, raising a glass of champagne in a crowded, jubilant bar. This was your victory party, Kennedy said, his voice flat. The receipt, obtained from your campaign finance filings, shows this bottle of champagne cost $247, paid for by your donors. While you were drinking $200 champagne to celebrate your victory, Miguel Suarez's son was delivering a cold pizza for a $3 tip. While you were laughing, Denise Williams was crying over her balance sheets. While you were celebrating, Carmen Rodriguez was tucking her children into bed. Her dreams of a better life turned to ash. That is the real story of your victory, Congresswoman. A story of devastating economic vandalism celebrated with expensive champagne. A single tear escaped her eye and traced a path through her makeup. The strong, defiant warrior who had entered the room hours ago was gone, replaced by a woman forced, perhaps for the first time, to confront the profound human wreckage left in the wake of her ideological certainty. The hearing room had become a vacuum, devoid of air and energy. The weight of the Amazon revelations pressed down on everyone, a shared burden of witnessing such a comprehensive and personal failure. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did not look up when Senator Kennedy reached for his fourth folder. She seemed to be staring at a fixed point on the table, her focus turned inward, perhaps replaying the series of choices that had led her to this moment of utter ruin. The folder was green, a small, almost cruelly ironic detail. Kennedy opened it with the same methodical care as the others. "Congresswoman," he began, his voice a low, steady current in the silent room, "you are arguably the nation's most prominent voice on the issue of climate change. You are the lead sponsor of the Green New Deal. You have described this as an existential crisis, a battle for the very survival of our planet. Is that a fair characterization of your position?" Her response was a barely audible whisper. "Yes." "Please speak up for the record, Congresswoman," the chairman gently prodded. "Yes," she repeated, her voice thin and brittle. "It is the defining challenge of our generation." "I could not agree more," Kennedy said, his sincerity disarming. "It is a profoundly serious issue that demands serious leadership, which is why I found your personal travel records so deeply perplexing." He slid a thick, bound report from the folder. "This is a comprehensive analysis of your travel from January 2021 through December 2023, compiled from public flight records, congressional travel disclosures, and your own social media posts. In that 3-year period, you took 137 flights." He let the number sink in. That averages to nearly one flight every single week. But the number itself is not the most telling detail. The telling detail is this: 47 of those flights were on private jets. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Even the most jaded reporters looked up from their screens, stunned. Private jets. The ultimate symbol of carbon-intensive, out-of-touch elitism. "Private jets," Kennedy repeated, letting the words hang in the air like toxic exhaust fumes. "The single most polluting form of transportation known to man. A single round trip from Washington, D.C. to New York on a private Gulfstream, a trip you made 23 times, generates more carbon dioxide than the average global citizen produces in an entire year. You are not just failing to practice what you preach, Congresswoman. You are living a lifestyle that is a caricature of everything you claim to oppose." He consulted a spreadsheet from the folder, a meticulous log of her hypocrisy. Let's review a few highlights. March 15, 2022. You flew by private jet from Washington to New York to speak at a climate emergency rally. You stood before a crowd of young people and spoke of the urgent need for shared sacrifice. You then returned to Washington that same evening, again by private jet. Commercial shuttles, which produce a fraction of the emissions, run between those two cities every 30 minutes. But apparently, they were not convenient enough for our generation's leading climate warrior. Those trips were often dictated by security concerns and scheduling, she began, the excuse sounding weak and rehearsed. "Security," Kennedy mused. "Let's look at April 7, 2023. You took a private jet to Miami for a high-dollar Democratic Party fundraiser. Not an official duty, not a climate summit, a cocktail party with wealthy donors. 2 days later, you flew back, again on a private jet, with a stop in Atlanta for another fundraiser. The carbon footprint of your weekend of partisan schmoozing exceeded that of a small African village for an entire year. Was your security under threat at the cocktail party?" He didn't wait for an answer. "But my favorite example is your 2022 Earth Day speech. It was a beautiful speech. You said, and I quote, The time for incrementalism is over. We must be honest with ourselves about the sacrifices this will require. Flying less, driving less, consuming less. You delivered that powerful call to action on April 22nd. 2 days later, on April 24th, you took a private jet to Los Angeles to appear on a podcast. The topic of the podcast, of course, was the climate crisis. The irony was so profound, so utterly shameless, that it drew a few bitter chuckles from the gallery. But let's not limit ourselves to air travel, Kennedy continued, relentless. Let's talk about your ground transportation. Your congressional office and campaign spent a combined $32,847 on ride-sharing services like Uber and Lyft in 2022 alone. You live and work in 2 of the few American cities with world-class public transportation, systems you have praised as models for a sustainable future. Yet you personally opted for private cars over 1,400 times. While your constituents are packed into a sweltering subway car on a delayed train, you are in the back of an air-conditioned SUV, likely tweeting about the importance of public transit. Sometimes my schedule requires you to take an Uber for a 2-block trip from your apartment to a Whole Foods? Kennedy interjected, holding up a receipt. Was the organic kale aisle considered a high-threat environment? He put down the paper and picked up a tablet, connecting it to the room's displays. A carbon footprint calculator appeared on the screen. "Let's do the math together," he said, his voice taking on a professorial tone. "Based on the flight data and ground transportation records, your personal carbon footprint for the year 2022 was approximately 247 metric tons of CO2. He typed the numbers in. The result glowed on the screen. The average American, whom you lecture about their gas-guzzling pickup trucks and their hamburger consumption, produces about 16 tons. You, Congresswoman, the great climate champion, personally generated the carbon emissions of 15 average Americans. The number, 247 tons, seemed to burn on the screen, a digital brand of hypocrisy. But surely, Kennedy continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm, you offset this enormous personal pollution. Do you purchase carbon credits to mitigate the damage from your private jet travel? Silence. Have you invested your own money in renewable energy projects? Silence. Have you even installed solar panels on your Washington, D.C. apartment? Renters don't have control over... But you are not a typical renter. Kennedy's voice rose for the first time, not in anger, but in sheer exasperation. You are a United States Congresswoman who is proposing to restructure our entire national economy. If you cannot figure out how to navigate a co-op board to install a few solar panels, how can you possibly be trusted to manage a $93 trillion overhaul of our energy grid? He gestured back to the folder. Let's talk about that $93 trillion number. That is the consensus estimate from multiple independent economic analyses for the cost of your Green New Deal. There are roughly 150 million households in this country. That comes out to $620,000 per American family. That is the bill you are sending them. Those figures are inflated by fossil fuel interests, she mumbled. Then what are your figures? Kennedy shot back. You have been championing this plan for 5 years. You must have a detailed budget. You must have a cost analysis. Show it to us. Show the American people your math. Her mouth opened, then closed. There was no math. There was no plan. There was only a slogan. This brings me to my final point on this topic, Kennedy said, pulling out her official financial disclosure form. You claim to be at war with the fossil fuel industry. Yet, according to your own disclosure, your investment portfolio consists of broad-based index funds. Do you know what those funds hold, Congresswoman? They hold shares in ExxonMobil, in Chevron, in British Petroleum. You are literally, personally profiting from the very industry you declare to be the greatest evil of our time. He leaned back, the case made. So let us summarize. You fly private, take Ubers everywhere, invest in big oil, and have no idea how much your own signature legislation costs. Yet you demand that working families sacrifice their jobs, their cars, and their quality of life to meet your environmental vision. Do I have that correct? He closed the green folder. You know what truly troubles me, Congresswoman? It's not just the hypocrisy, as staggering as it is. It's that you are turning the noble cause of environmental protection into a joke. You are giving ammunition to every cynic who claims climate change is a hoax perpetrated by elites who want to control their lives. You are not helping the planet. You are hurting the cause by making it synonymous with your own brand of performative, out-of-touch elitism. The air in the hearing room was now heavy with a palpable sense of sorrow. The spectacle was no longer entertaining. It was tragic. The systematic destruction of a public figure, piece by painful piece, had become an exercise in political cruelty, however earned. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez seemed to have retreated into a state of shock, her face a blank mask of resignation. Her attorney whispered to her, but she gave no sign of hearing him. She was adrift in the wreckage of her own making. Senator Kennedy reached for his fifth folder. It was worn and dog-eared, its contents clearly the subject of long and careful study. When he opened it, he did not immediately pull out a document. Instead, he simply looked at her, his expression not of triumph, but of profound disappointment. "Congresswoman," he began, his Louisiana drawl imbued with a quiet gravity, "we have spoken of galas and finances, of jobs and jets. Now I wish to speak of home, of your district. New York's 14th, encompassing some of the most vibrant and hard-working communities in this nation, the people of the Bronx and Queens who placed their faith in you. Let us discuss what has become of that faith and what has become of their home under your stewardship." He produced a series of stark black and white charts, their data sourced directly from the New York City Police Department. In 2018, the year you were first elected, there were 1,247 reported violent crimes in your district. Last year, that number was 1,837. That is a 47% increase. Robberies are up. Felony assaults are up. Your constituents are objectively, demonstrably less safe today than they were the day you took office. "Crime is a complex, systemic issue," she began, the words a robotic recitation of a familiar progressive catechism. "Everything is complex when it is your responsibility," Kennedy cut in, his voice sharp for the first time. "But let us make it simple." He held up a police report, its dry official language detailing a brutal reality. "This is the report on the robbery of Mrs. Eleanor Chen, a 71-year-old grandmother. She was attacked at knife point in the lobby of her own apartment building in Jackson Heights, the same building she has lived in for 40 years. She wrote to your office, terrified, begging for increased police patrols. I have your staff's response." He held up a form letter. "Thank you for your concern," it reads. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez is committed to reimagining public safety through community-based alternatives to policing. You sent a talking point to a terrified elderly woman who had a knife held to her throat. You sent her jargon while she was afraid to check her own mail." He put the letter down, his disgust palpable. "Let's talk about the lifeblood of your district, its small businesses." He produced another chart. In 2018, there were 12,456 active small business licenses in your district. As of last month, there are 9,832. You have lost over 2,600 small businesses on your watch, a 21% decline. These are not just numbers on a page. They are family dreams turned to dust. He gestured to the video screen, which once again flickered to life. A middle-aged man with tired eyes stood in front of a boarded-up storefront. "Roberto Fernandez," he said, his voice heavy. "This was my restaurant. 15 years. My parents sank their life savings into this place. When the Congresswoman killed the Amazon deal, the lunch crowd disappeared. When she pushed for the wage hikes without any relief for small businesses, my costs exploded. I held on as long as I could. I laid off 12 people, my neighbors, before I had to close the doors for good. She talks about fighting for us? She destroyed us. The screen shifted to a woman in a hijab, standing in what was clearly a small, empty office. My name is Fatima Al-Jamil. I ran a small tax preparation service for other immigrant families. After the Congresswoman's repeated inflammatory statements about Israel, the atmosphere in the neighborhood changed. My Jewish and non-Jewish clients, they started fighting in my waiting room. I had people threaten me for having a Jewish landlord. She poured gasoline on our community and walked away to be famous. I closed my business because it was no longer safe. Kennedy paused the video. This brings us to a painful subject. Your district is a tapestry of cultures, including a large and historic Jewish community. Yet you have repeatedly used rhetoric that has been condemned by mainstream Jewish organizations. You have aligned yourself with colleagues who have engaged in anti-Semitic tropes. And the results? They are predictable, and they are tragic. He held up another NYPD report. In 2018, there were 37 reported anti-Semitic incidents in your district. Last year, there were 119, a 222% increase. Swastikas on synagogues, Orthodox Jews being assaulted on the street, Jewish-owned businesses being boycotted. Your constituents are living in fear while you collect accolades from radical anti-Israel activists. That is a disgusting mischaracterization of my position, she shot back, a flash of anger penetrating her stupor. Is it? Kennedy asked quietly. Then why did the Queen's Jewish Community Council write in this open letter, and I quote, Representative Ocasio-Cortez has, through her rhetoric and her associations, created an environment where anti-Semitism has been allowed to fester. We no longer consider her a friend or an ally of our community. Are they lying too, Congresswoman? He didn't wait for a reply. But let's talk about your most famous moment of personal fear. January 6, 2021. You gave a harrowing, emotional account on social media of hiding in your office bathroom, convinced that insurrectionists were coming to kill you. It was powerful testimony. The only problem is, it was pure fiction. He unrolled a large architectural diagram of the U.S. Capitol complex. This, he said, pointing to the iconic dome, is the Capitol building, where the riot and the breach occurred. Your office, he said, pointing to a completely separate building across the street, is here, in the Cannon House office building. You were not in the Capitol. No rioters ever entered your building. You were never in any physical danger. I experienced trauma, she insisted, her voice trembling. I have no doubt that it was a frightening day for everyone in Washington, Kennedy conceded, his tone gentle. But you did not just say you were scared. You constructed an elaborate narrative. You spoke of hearing banging on your door and thinking, this is the moment I die. You described hiding behind my bathroom door. But the banging was a Capitol Police officer trying to direct you to a safe location. You were not hiding from a mob. You were hiding from the police who were there to protect you. He held up a security log. This is the official log from the Cannon building for that day. No unauthorized entries, no security breaches, no threats. And this, he said, gesturing to the video screen, which now showed grainy security footage, is you. At 2:47 p.m., during the height of the riot, you are walking calmly down a hallway in the Cannon building, looking at your phone. Does this look like a person in mortal terror, fighting for her life? The video was damning. The contrast between the woman strolling casually down the hall and the story she had told the world was absolute. You took the genuine trauma of your colleagues who were in the line of fire, Kennedy said, his voice cold with contempt, and you appropriated it for your own political brand. You monetized their fear for clicks and sympathy. It is a form of stolen valor, and it is beneath the dignity of your office. He looked back at his notes. While you were manufacturing your own drama for a national audience, your constituents were living through real trauma. Violent crime skyrocketing. Anti-Semitic attacks tripling. Their businesses failing. But you were too busy auditioning for the role of national hero to notice the suffering of the people who actually elected you. "I have fought for my district," she whispered. "Have you?" Kennedy challenged. "When was the last time you held a public, in-person town hall meeting? Not a curated Instagram Live, but a real meeting where any constituent could show up and ask you an unfiltered question." Silence. "I can tell you," Kennedy said. "August of 2019, over 4 years ago, you have abandoned your constituents for the fleeting adoration of a national fan club that cannot cast a single vote in your district." He closed the fifth folder. The demolition was nearly complete. "We have one final topic to discuss, Congresswoman," he said, reaching for the last, slender folder. "Your academic qualifications. Because if you are going to propose rewriting the American economy, I believe the American people have a right to know if you have ever read the textbook." The hearing room had become a place of profound and uncomfortable intimacy. The political had become personal, and the personal had been rendered devastatingly public. What began as a partisan skirmish had morphed into a solemn inquest into the anatomy of a political phenomenon. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat motionless, a statue of defeat, as Senator Kennedy reached for the sixth and final folder. It was thin, almost an afterthought compared to the dense volumes that had preceded it, but it would deliver the coup de grace. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez," Kennedy began, his voice now devoid of all theatricality, carrying only the weight of the final grim task. "You have built your entire political identity on the foundation of being an expert. You lecture CEOs on their business models, you lecture your Senate colleagues on fiscal policy, and you lecture the American people on the intricate workings of our economy. It is only fitting, then, that we conclude today by examining the bedrock of that expertise, your academic qualifications." He slid from the folder a single official-looking document, its header bearing the crest of Boston University. "This is your official academic transcript, obtained with the necessary legal permissions. You graduated with honors, holding a Bachelor of Arts degree in both international relations and economics. On the surface, it is an impressive achievement. But as we have learned today, the surface rarely tells the whole story." AOC's attorney, who had been a silent, helpless spectator for hours, began to rise, a reflexive objection forming on his lips. But she stopped him with a small, defeated shake of her head. There was no point. The final act had to be played. "Let us examine your economics coursework," Kennedy continued, running his finger down the page. "Principles of Microeconomics, a B-. Principles of Macroeconomics, a C+. Intermediate Microeconomic Theory, a C. Statistical Analysis for Economists." He paused, looking up at her over the rim of his glasses. "You received a D. AD in statistics, the fundamental language of economic analysis. Yet you build your arguments on statistics every single day. How can one speak a language in which they are not even remotely fluent?" He did not wait for an answer that he knew would not come. "Economic development, a C. Public finance, a C. And here, the most telling entry of all, econometrics, the application of statistical methods to economic data. You failed it. You received an F and were required to retake the course. On your second attempt, you managed a D+. Whispers and muffled gasps filled the room. The self-proclaimed economic visionary, the architect of a plan to fundamentally reshape the largest economy in the history of the world, had failed and barely passed the most basic courses in her chosen field. "Your international relations grades tell a similar story," Kennedy noted, his voice a monotone of factual recitation. "Comparative politics, a C. International political economy, a C. And you withdrew entirely from a seminar on advanced economic theory, presumably because the material was beyond your grasp. Grades are not the only measure of understanding, she murmured, the words a faint echo of a defense she no longer believed herself. You are correct, Kennedy conceded, but they are a measure of one's grasp of fundamental concepts, and your own professors seem to share the transcript's assessment. He produced another paper, a faculty evaluation form. This is from Dr. Michael Pearson, your professor for intermediate theory. He wrote in his final assessment, and I quote, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez displays a great deal of passion for the subject matter, but she fundamentally lacks an intuitive grasp of core economic principles. She frequently confuses correlation with causation and demonstrates a significant weakness in quantitative reasoning. Kennedy set the evaluation down. But let us not rely on the opinions of others. Let us test your knowledge directly, here and now. A simple question, Congresswoman. What is the Laffer curve? The silence that followed was absolute. Her eyes, blank and unfocused, stared at him. She had no idea. It is a foundational concept in tax policy, Kennedy explained, his tone now that of a patient but disappointed teacher. It illustrates the theoretical relationship between rates of taxation and the resulting levels of government revenue. You have famously advocated for tax rates as high as 70%, yet you are unfamiliar with the most basic theoretical framework for analyzing the potential consequences of such a policy. He pressed on. Let's try another. What is the functional difference between monetary policy and fiscal policy? Again, a vacant stare. The silence stretched, becoming excruciating. These are questions from an Economics 101 midterm, Kennedy said, his voice laced with disbelief. You sit on the House Financial Services Committee. You propose legislation that would have multi-trillion-dollar impacts on the global economy, and you cannot answer a question that a college freshman would be expected to know. He picked up a pocket calculator. Let's try some simple arithmetic. Your Green New Deal has an estimated cost of $93 trillion. The current gross domestic product of the United States is roughly $25 trillion. How many years of the entire nation's economic output would be required to pay for your plan? She stared at the calculator as if it were an alien artifact. Kennedy punched in the numbers himself. The answer is 3.72. Your plan would consume the equivalent of every single good and service produced in this country for almost 4 years. Every salary, every product, every meal, every transaction. Did you know that when you proposed it? The financing would be complex, she began. What financing? Kennedy pressed, his voice firm. You have had 5 years. Show me the model. Show me the spreadsheet. Show me one page of math that demonstrates how this is anything other than a fantasy. The request was met with the same profound silence. The math did not exist, because it had never been done. This brings me to your senior thesis, Kennedy said, picking up another document, a capstone project on the impact of microfinance in developing nations. Your faculty advisor, a Professor Johnson, gave it a C-. In his evaluation, he wrote, Kennedy read from the page, This paper is rich in passion, but poor in rigor. The statistical analysis is deeply flawed, the economic models are misapplied, and the conclusions are not supported by the evidence presented. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez would be well advised to take remedial coursework in research methodology before pursuing any graduate-level studies. He looked up at her, his expression one of pity. You did not graduate with honors because you mastered your field of study. You graduated because your university, like so many others, practices grade inflation. You are, in essence, the recipient of an academic participation trophy. The insult, delivered in his calm, southern cadence, was more brutal than any shout. After receiving this economics degree, Kennedy continued, did you go to work on Wall Street? For a think tank? For the Federal Reserve? No. You worked as a bartender. That is honorable, honest work. My own nephew tended bar to put himself through law school. But my nephew did not then stand before this nation and presume to lecture the chairman of the Federal Reserve on interest rate policy. He held up one last damning piece of paper. This is a statement from the manager of a coffee shop where you worked before your bartending job. He writes, Sandy, that was the name you used then, was a bright and friendly employee, but we had to move her off the cash register. She struggled with basic math and repeatedly gave customers the wrong change. The revelation was so simple, so elemental, that it was utterly devastating. The woman who wanted to manage a $93 trillion economic transformation could not be trusted to make change at a coffee shop. He closed the final folder. The story was complete. "You are not an unintelligent woman, Congresswoman," Kennedy said, his voice softening into a final, somber judgment. "But you are economically illiterate, and in the halls of this government, that is the equivalent of being a surgeon who is ignorant of human anatomy. The intentions may be good, but people get hurt. Your constituents, the American people, they are the ones who bleed when you commit malpractice." The 6 folders lay closed on the table, a row of tombs containing the buried remains of a political career. The hearing room was suspended in a state of stunned, absolute silence. The reporters had stopped typing. The cameras had stopped flashing. All eyes were fixed on the woman at the witness table, a figure now hollowed out, stripped of her armor, her ideology, her very identity. The relentless, methodical accumulation of facts, of invoices and ethics reports, of economic data and human testimonials, of academic transcripts and her own words, had left nothing behind. The silence was finally broken by a sound, a choked, ragged sob. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the warrior, the giant slayer, the voice of a generation, buried her face in her hands and wept. They were not the performative tears of a politician seeking sympathy, but the deep, soul-shattering tears of someone confronting the totality of their own ruin. Senator Kennedy watched her, and for the first time, the hard lines of his face softened into something approaching pity. He took off his glasses and began to clean them with a slow, deliberate motion, a small gesture of grace that gave the room and the broken woman before him a moment to breathe. When he finally spoke, his voice was not that of a prosecutor, but of a weary judge delivering a final, sorrowful verdict. "Congresswoman," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the silent room. "I take no joy in this, none at all. But when you walked into this room this morning and chose to attack my integrity, my family's history, and my right to serve the people of my state, you opened a door. You made this a trial of character, and in a trial of character, the truth is the only witness that matters." He gestured with his glasses toward the mountain of evidence he had assembled. "Everything we have discussed today, every single fact, was a matter of public record. It was all there, hiding in plain sight. Any journalist, any opponent, any curious citizen could have found it, but they didn't. Have you ever asked yourself why?" She shook her head mutely, her shoulders trembling. "Because you were a useful fiction," Kennedy explained, his voice a sad clinical diagnosis of the political ecosystem. "The media used you for ratings and clicks. Your party's establishment used you to excite a base they no longer understood. Even your opponents, in a way, used you. You were the perfect foil, a caricature of progressive excess that made their own jobs easier. Everyone in this town had a vested interest in maintaining the myth of AOC." He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. "But myths are a dangerous foundation upon which to build a government. When we allow celebrity to supplant competence, when we choose slogans over solutions, when we value the passion of the performance over the quiet drudgery of the work, real people get hurt. The people of your district, Congresswoman, they are the ones who paid the price for our collective fiction." He began to methodically stack the folders, each one a chapter in his closing argument. Let us summarize the facts presented today. You decried the wealthy at a $35,000 a ticket gala, while leaving over $100,000 in unpaid bills to working-class vendors. You condemned dark money while funneling your own campaign funds through a black box LLC. You celebrated killing 25,000 high-paying jobs in your own district. You preached climate austerity from the cabin of a private jet, while personally profiting from investments in fossil fuels. You abandoned your constituents to rising crime and economic decay, while you manufactured false stories of your own heroism for national attention. And you did all of this while possessing a grasp of economics so tenuous that you could not be trusted to make change at a coffee shop. Each point was a nail being hammered into the coffin of her public persona. She flinched with every sentence, as if absorbing a physical blow. But the most damning fact of all, Kennedy continued, his voice hardening slightly, is that on some level you knew. You are not a fool. You knew the issues were more complex than a 280-character tweet. You knew the numbers in your Green New Deal didn't add up. You knew you were leaving unpaid bills. You knew you were abandoning your district for the allure of the spotlight. But the applause was a drug. The fame was a narcotic. And the power to shape the narrative was the most seductive intoxicant of all. He stood up, a rare and powerful gesture that drew every eye. "Young lady," he said, the address both paternal and dismissive, "you came into this chamber this morning believing you were David, armed with a righteous slingshot, ready to slay the Goliath of the establishment. But you were never David. You were Goliath, drunk on your own power, wrapped in the armor of your own self-righteousness, utterly convinced of your moral superiority, even as you trampled on the lives of the little people beneath you. The only difference is that today, you ran into a shepherd who knew how to find the one small, vulnerable spot in your armor." The biblical allegory hung in the air, a final devastating summation. From the depths of her despair, a small, broken voice emerged. What do I do now?" It was the first honest question she had asked all day. It was the question of a person whose entire world had been demolished, who was standing in the rubble with no idea how to take the first step. Kennedy's expression softened. He sat back down, the towering judge receding, replaced by the weary history teacher. "That," he said gently, "is the question that will define the rest of your life. It will determine whether today was a destruction or an education. You have two paths. You can walk out of that door, call a press conference, and claim you are the victim of a coordinated smear campaign. You can blame me, the media, the system. You can double down on the performance. Or you can do something truly revolutionary." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "You can learn. You can go home. Not to tweet, not to fundraise, but to listen. Go to a library and read the economics books you failed in college. Hold a town hall and face the constituents you've ignored. Apologize to the small business owners you failed to pay. Find Maria Santos and help her with her son's medical bills. Start with one person, one family. Learn that governance is not about saving the world in a single grand gesture. It is about serving your community, one person at a time, in the quiet, unglamorous, and often thankless work of public service." A tearful, almost inaudible whisper escaped her lips. "I'm sorry." It was not a political apology. It was a confession. "I'm so sorry. I thought caring was enough." Kennedy nodded slowly. "Caring is where it begins, Congresswoman, but it is not where it ends. It must be followed by competence, by humility, and by a respect for the truth, no matter how inconvenient. You owe the people you have hurt more than your sorrow. You owe them your actions." The committee chairman, rousing himself from a state of stunned paralysis, finally spoke. "I believe this hearing has reached its conclusion." As AOC rose on trembling legs, a ghost of her former self, Kennedy called out to her one last time. "Congresswoman, She turned, her face a ruin of tear-streaked makeup and raw shame. "That seamstress, Mrs. Santos. Her son's surgery is next month. Start there." She nodded, a single jerky motion, and then she fled, a refugee from her own life, pursued by the ghosts of her own choices. The storm had passed. The hearing room, which had been the epicenter of a political earthquake, was now quiet, littered with the debris of the day's battle, discarded paper cups, hastily scribbled notes, and the lingering scent of ozone and conflict. Senator John Kennedy remained in his seat long after the cameras had been packed away, and the last of the reporters had rushed off to file their stories. He methodically gathered his folders, the weapons he had wielded with such devastating precision, and placed them back into his worn leather briefcase. A Republican colleague, a younger man known for his own sharp-tongued attacks, approached him with a look of awe and unease. "John," he said, his voice hushed, "that was a masterclass. But my God, was it necessary to burn her down to the foundations?" Kennedy looked up, his pale blue eyes weary, the fire of the prosecutor extinguished, leaving behind the tired embers of a man who had just performed a deeply unpleasant task. "Son," he said, his voice raspy, "my father taught me two things about fights. First, never start one. Second, if someone else starts one by questioning your honor, you finish it so decisively that no one ever considers starting another." He snapped his briefcase shut. "She came for my integrity. She shot at the king. She just didn't know the king had a cannon." But as he walked through the marble hallways of the Russell Senate office building, the satisfaction of victory was absent. There was no elation, only a profound and heavy sense of waste. All that energy, all that charisma, all that potential, curdled by arrogance and a fatal addiction to the spotlight. 2 days later, the whirlwind had not subsided. The media was in a frenzy, dissecting every moment of what they were calling the reckoning. Pundits on the left were struggling to defend the indefensible, while those on the right were celebrating with a triumphalism that Kennedy found distasteful. He had retreated to his modest home in Madisonville, Louisiana, a world away from the marble and malice of Washington. He sat on his back porch, a glass of iced tea sweating in his hand, watching the muddy waters of the Chifuncte River slide by. The air was thick with the scent of magnolias and the drone of cicadas, a balm for a soul bruised by the ugliness of the battle. His wife, Becky, came out and sat in the rocking chair beside him. She didn't speak for a long time, simply matching her rhythm to his, a silent, supportive presence. "You've been quiet since you got home," she finally said. "Just thinking," he admitted, swirling the ice in his glass, "wondering if I should have pulled the punches. She was just a kid, in the grand scheme of things." Becky looked out at the river. "She's a 34-year-old congresswoman, John, and she came after you with a knife. Would being gentle have taught her a thing? Probably not," he conceded with a sigh. "But there's no joy in watching a person's world crumble. It just feels like a tragedy, a waste of a life that could have been something." The news from Washington was a steady drumbeat of her collapse. AOC had gone completely silent, her once prolific Twitter feed a digital ghost town. Her chief of staff had resigned. The House Ethics Committee had formally launched 2 separate investigations based on the evidence from the hearing. Prominent progressive groups were issuing carefully worded statements, distancing themselves from their fallen star. Rumors were swirling that a primary challenger, a pragmatic local councilwoman from Queens, was already gathering signatures. "You know what gets me the most," Kennedy said, his voice low. "It's the betrayal of it all. She had a gift, a genuine connection with people who felt invisible, a first-generation American, a woman of color who broke through every barrier. She could have been a new kind of leader, but she fell in love with the reflection in the mirror instead of the people she was supposed to be reflecting." Inside, the television murmured, replaying clips from the hearing. Kennedy's calm, relentless voice, AOC's crumbling defenses, the shocked faces in the gallery. He turned his chair slightly so he wouldn't have to see it. "I got a call this morning," Becky said, her voice casual, "from a woman in New York, a Mrs. Santos." Kennedy sat up straight, his attention fully captured. "Maria Santos? The seamstress?" "The very one," Becky confirmed. "She wanted to thank you. Said the Congresswoman's office called her yesterday. First time she's ever heard from them directly. They're connecting her with a caseworker to navigate the Medicaid system for her son's surgery. They're actually helping." A slow smile spread across Kennedy's face, the first genuine smile he'd had in days. "Well, I'll be," he murmured. "So a seed landed on fertile ground after all." "Maybe," Becky said. "Or maybe she's just smart enough to do damage control." "Maybe," Kennedy repeated, but his eyes held a flicker of hope. "But you don't start damage control with one unknown seamstress. You start it with a press conference on the Capitol steps. This was different. This was quiet." His phone buzzed on the table beside him. He glanced at it, expecting another reporter or a colleague. It was a text from his grandson. "Grandpa, we watched the hearing in my government class. My teacher said you were a bully. But my friend, Sarah, her grandma is Mrs. Chen, the lady who got robbed. Sarah says you're a hero. Which one is it?" Kennedy smiled and typed back a reply. "Both, probably. The world isn't simple, son. Sometimes, to stop a bully, you have to be tougher than they are. The difference is why you do it. I wasn't trying to destroy her. I was trying to stop her from destroying others." Another text came immediately. "Is she a bad person?" Kennedy thought for a long moment, the setting sun casting long shadows across the porch. "No," he typed. "She's a person who got lost in the funhouse. Fame is a powerful drug, and she took too much of it. Maybe now she can get sober." As twilight settled over the bayou, he knew the story wasn't over. The political world would move on, finding new heroes to build up and new villains to tear down. But for one young woman, the world had stopped, and in that stillness, a choice had to be made. A choice between the easy path of victimhood and the hard, lonely road of redemption. He hoped, with a sincerity that surprised him, that she would choose the latter. The path that began not with a tweet, but with a phone call to a seamstress in Queens. The Louisiana night descended, thick and star-dusted, wrapping the porch in a blanket of warm, familiar darkness. The cacophony of Washington felt a universe away, an angry, distant star whose light was just now reaching this quiet corner of the world. John Kennedy's phone buzzed again, insistently this time. The caller ID displayed a name that made him sigh. Donald Trump. He silenced the call and tossed the phone onto the empty chair beside him. The former president would want to crow, to claim credit, to turn the day's painful lesson into a cheap political victory. Kennedy would have none of it. Tomorrow, he would return to the arena. He would do the interviews, answer the questions, and play the game as it had to be played. But tonight was for reflection, for weighing the cost of the battle he had won. "You know what my daddy would have said about all this?" Kennedy asked his wife, his voice a low rumble in the gathering dark. Becky smiled, a flash of white in the gloom. "I'm sure he'd have a saying for it. He'd have said, 'Johnny, you can shear a sheep 100 times, but you can only skin it once. That young woman, she got skinned today. The question is whether she's got the grit to grow a new fleece, or if she'll just stand there, shivering in the wind.'" He took a long sip of his now warm tea. "He also would have told me not to get into a spitting contest with a cobra, but she spit first." As if on cue, his phone lit up with a text message from an unexpected source. Senator Amy Klobuchar, a pragmatic Democrat from Minnesota. The message was brief. "John, watched the hearing. It was harsh, but it was necessary. Sometimes our side needs to be reminded that slogans aren't policy. Respect." Kennedy showed the screen to Becky. "Well, look at that," he murmured. "Maybe some good can come of this after all. Maybe it wasn't just about one person. Maybe it was a reminder to everyone in that town, on both sides of the aisle, that competence matters. That truth, sooner or later, always gets its turn at the microphone. A shooting star blazed a brief silver trail across the sky, and Kennedy found himself making a quiet wish. He wished not for himself, but for the young woman whose life he had so publicly and thoroughly dismantled. He wished her the humility to learn, the strength to endure the coming exile, and the courage to rebuild herself into a leader worthy of the people she had failed. "I think," he said to Becky, a new resolve in his voice, "I'm going to call the dean at Boston University tomorrow. And Vanderbilt. I want to set up a scholarship fund for students from working-class backgrounds who want to study economics, real economics, the kind with numbers and consequences. Maybe we can help train a few future leaders who actually understand the bills they're voting on." Becky reached over and squeezed his hand. "Turning a demolition into a construction project. Your daddy would have liked that." "He would, wouldn't he?" Kennedy's smile returned, genuine and deep. "He always said, 'Any damn fool can kick down a barn, son. It takes a carpenter to build one.'" As they stood to go inside, Kennedy took one last look at the star-filled sky. Somewhere, hundreds of miles away, a young congresswoman was enduring the longest night of her life, stripped of her power, her fame, and her certainty. But he knew, with the wisdom of a man who had seen many seasons come and go, that the darkest nights often give way to the brightest dawns. The hearing was over. The reckoning was complete, but the real work, the hard and quiet work of rebuilding, had just begun. Not just for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but for a political system that had become dangerously infatuated with performance over purpose, with celebrity over service. In the end, Senator John Kennedy had done more than win a debate. He had taught a lesson, brutal in its delivery, but essential in its substance. Whether Washington would learn from it remained to be seen. But in the quiet of a Louisiana evening, with his conscience clear and his duty done, he knew he had honored the legacy of the plain-spoken men and women he came from. He had shown that sometimes the greatest act of mercy is to refuse to let someone continue down a path of self-destruction. Sometimes the only way to save someone is to first tear them down, so they can finally learn how to build themselves back up, on a foundation not of myth, but of truth. The story you have just heard is a testament to the enduring power of facts in an age of fiction. It is a reminder that while passion can ignite a movement, only competence can govern a nation. If you believe that truth and accountability are the bedrock of public service, and that our leaders must be held to the highest standards of integrity and knowledge, then smash that like button, subscribe to this channel for more deep dives into the stories that truly matter, and share this video with anyone who needs to be reminded that in the arena of politics, character is destiny.